Something has been happening in you that you have not had words for. Not around you, not necessarily anywhere you could point to and explain to another person, but in you, quietly, for longer than you have been willing to admit. You did not click on this by chance. That instinct was accurate the entire time. Jeremiah 33 verse 3 says, "Call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." Notice the invitation embedded in that verse. It does not say the unsearchable stays unsearchable forever. It says calling out opens something previously closed. What has felt hidden in your life has not been withheld out of neglect. It has been kept deliberately until the moment it could be received well. You have likely wondered more than once why certain things in your life took so long to become clear, why some doors stayed shut. Why some seasons felt like standing still while everything around you seemed to move. None of that was random, and none of it was wasted. What was hidden was being prepared, carefully, for a moment that had not yet arrived. You have probably tried to explain the feeling away. A busy season, a slow chapter, a stretch of ordinary life that would eventually pass on its own. Some of that explanation may hold a small piece of truth. But underneath it, something steadier has been building, something that has not gone away, no matter how many times you tried to talk yourself out of noticing it. That moment is closer now than it has been, not because anything external changed overnight, but because something in you has finally caught up to what was always being formed. What follows will name that process honestly, without exaggeration, and without rushing past what still deserves careful attention. Stay with it. What was hidden is ready to be seen. This is not a call to force anything open before it is time, and it is not permission to keep standing at the edge of what has already been prepared for you. It is an invitation to see clearly what the waiting accomplished, so you can walk into what comes next with steadiness, instead of scrambling to catch up to something that has been ready for you longer than you realized. 1. The silence was preparation, not punishment. A certain kind of cheese cannot be rushed. It goes into a cellar young, unfinished, barely resembling what it will eventually become, and it stays there, in darkness, at a carefully controlled temperature, for months or sometimes years. Nothing about that cellar looks productive from the outside. No sound, no visible transformation, nothing to point to as proof that anything is happening. And yet the entire character of what emerges, its depth, its complexity, its value, depends entirely on that unglamorous, unseen stretch of time. Your quiet seasons have worked the same way. Matthew 6 verse 6 says, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." Notice the specific word used there. Not hears, sees. Every private moment of surrender, every unwitnessed act of faithfulness, every whispered prayer nobody else knew you prayed, was seen in full, even during the years it felt like shouting into an empty room. Psalm 91 verse 1 calls this the secret place of the Most High, not a place of exile, a place of shelter, closer to a refinery than a hiding spot. Being drawn into stillness was never a demotion. It was an invitation into the exact conditions something valuable needs in order to develop without being damaged by premature exposure. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." Not early, not on your preferred schedule. In its time, the way a cellar keeper knows exactly how long a particular batch needs before it is ready, resisting the urge to open it prematurely just because waiting has become uncomfortable. What has felt like delay in your life was never delay by the measure that matters. It was the specific amount of time your particular formation required. You may have assumed, during your hardest stretches of quiet, that you had been forgotten or overlooked. You were not. You were being kept in exactly the right conditions, at exactly the right pace, for exactly the outcome that could not have been rushed into being without losing what made it valuable in the first place. Think about what happens to a cellar keeper who opens the door too early, unable to resist checking, convinced that surely enough time has passed by now. They do not find a finished product ahead of schedule. They find something interrupted, something that will never fully recover the depth it would have developed had it been left alone a while longer. Patience with the unseen is not the same as passivity. It is trust applied to a process that genuinely cannot be sped up without damaging the outcome. There will likely be more seasons like this ahead of you, stretches where nothing seems to be happening on the surface. When they come, remember what this one taught you. The absence of visible progress has never meant the absence of real progress. Some of the most valuable things forming in you happen exactly where no audience, including you, can watch them happening. Or consider what actually distinguishes a hidden season from a forgotten one. A forgotten thing receives no attention at all, no care, no maintenance, nothing tending to its development. A hidden thing, by contrast, is being watched closely, monitored carefully, and kept in exactly the conditions its particular formation requires. From the outside, both can look identical, dark, quiet, unremarkable. From the inside, they could not be more different. You were never forgotten. You were watched the entire time, closely enough that every necessary adjustment was made on your behalf, even the ones you never noticed happening. That distinction alone is worth carrying forward into whatever quiet season comes next. When the silence returns, and it likely will at some point, you will not have to relitigate whether it means abandonment. You will already know what it actually means. The cost of speaking too soon. Have you noticed the particular urgency that shows up right after something significant becomes clear to you, an overwhelming desire to announce it, explain it, post it, prove it, before it has finished forming? That urgency feels like conviction. Often, it is something closer to impatience wearing conviction's clothing. Freshly cut timber cannot be used for construction the moment it is felled. It has to season first, sometimes for months, allowed to dry slowly, so its internal moisture releases at a controlled pace. Wood used too early warps, cracks, and buckles under weight. It was never strong enough to bear yet. Not because the wood itself was flawed, but because it was pressed into service before its structure had finished settling. What you are carrying right now may be just as real and just as valuable as that timber. It may also need more time than your excitement wants to give it. Proverbs 19 verse 2 says, "Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way?" What burns in you right now might be entirely accurate. That does not automatically mean this is the moment to release it. Some of the costliest mistakes come not from believing something false, but from acting on something true before it was actually time. Even Jesus practiced this kind of restraint. John 16 verse 12 records him telling his disciples plainly, "I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear." He did not withhold those words because they were untrue. He withheld them because timing matters as much as truth does, and forcing revelation onto people, or moments not yet ready to receive it, rarely produces what patience would have produced instead. Here is a practical way to test what you are carrying before you release it. Has it held up under sustained prayer, not just a single emotional high? Has it survived honest conversation with someone wise enough to ask you hard questions about it? Has time itself, only passing, done anything to weaken your conviction about it, or has it only grown steadier the longer you have sat with it? Excitement alone is not evidence of readiness. Excitement paired with time, prayer, and wise counsel that has not shaken it is a far more trustworthy signal. Consider how differently your own certainty tends to hold up after a full season compared to how it feels in the first rush of clarity. Some convictions fade within weeks, revealed as passing enthusiasm rather than genuine direction. Others only grow steadier, tested by ordinary life and unremarkable days, until what once felt like a spark has become something closer to bedrock. Learn to notice which kind you are holding before you decide it is time to speak. Give the process the time it is actually asking for, not the time your impatience is willing to allow. Those two timelines rarely match, and the difference between them is usually where the real testing happens. None of this is an argument for permanent silence, or a suggestion that timing should become an excuse for endless delay. At some point, seasoned timber does get used, and a tested conviction does get spoken. The goal is not to withhold indefinitely out of fear. The goal is to let the process finish what it needs to finish, so that what you eventually say or do can bear the weight it was always meant to carry. There is a difference between wise restraint and fearful avoidance, and it is worth naming clearly. Wise restraint waits because the work is not yet finished. Fearful avoidance waits because moving forward feels frightening, regardless of whether the work is finished or not. If you find yourself endlessly postponing, always finding one more reason to delay no matter how much time or confirmation has accumulated, that pattern deserves honest examination. Genuine readiness eventually settles into peace. Fear rarely does, no matter how much time you give it. 3. Discernment, not suspicion. Not every relationship that fades during a season of growth was a betrayal. This needs to be said plainly, because it is easy, in seasons of real change, to reinterpret every distance as an attack and every quiet friendship as a hidden agenda. Sometimes that reading is accurate. Often, it is not. People change at different paces, and a relationship drifting apart is not automatically evidence that someone was working against you. A sonar operator spends years learning to distinguish a genuine signal from ambient noise, the ordinary churn of water, distant currents, the routine hum of machinery that means nothing. Early in training, everything sounds like a potential threat. With experience, the ear learns what deserves attention and what is only the normal texture of the environment. Discernment works the same way in relationships. Early on, every change can feel alarming. Maturity teaches you to tell the difference between something worth genuine caution and something that is only the ordinary sound of people and seasons shifting. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Guarding your heart is wisdom." It is not the same instruction as suspecting everyone around you of hidden motives. You can hold healthy boundaries. Protect what is sacred to you, and choose carefully who you confide in, without assuming the worst about every person who does not walk your exact pace. Amos 3 verse 3 asks, "Can two walk together unless they be agreed?" Agreement, in that verse, describes genuine alignment, not identical opinions on everything or constant physical proximity. Some people were always going to walk beside you for a season, and not the whole distance, and that is not automatically a wound. It may only be the natural shape of how people move through different chapters of life at different speeds. If you have been genuinely betrayed, name it honestly, and give yourself real space to grieve it. That grief is legitimate and does not need to be spiritualized away. But not every ending, every distance, every quiet exit from your life deserves that label. Some relationships were only seasonal, offered exactly what they were meant to offer, and concluded without anyone doing anything wrong. Learning to tell the difference rather than defaulting to suspicion is its own kind of maturity. This distinction matters because the alternative carries a real cost. A posture of constant suspicion, applied indiscriminately to everyone around you, tends to isolate you from the very people who might have genuinely supported you through this season. Vigilance has its place, blanket distrust does not. Learning to hold healthy caution without letting it calcify into a permanent defensive posture is one of the more difficult and more necessary skills this season is asking you to develop. Give yourself permission to extend grace to people who only grew in a different direction than you did, without requiring that grace to also excuse genuine harm where it occurred. Both postures can exist at once. Careful discernment about who deserves your trust, and generosity toward people whose only offense was changing at a different pace than you expected them to. If you are still sorting through a recent season of relational change, give yourself time before assigning a final label to what happened. Some clarity about a relationship's true nature only becomes visible with distance, once the immediate hurt or confusion has settled enough for you to see the pattern clearly rather than reacting to the sting of the moment. There is no need to rush that sorting process either. It deserves the same patience you are learning to extend to everything else that is still forming. 4. The danger of performing for an audience. Being seen and being validated get confused more easily than most people realize, even though they are not the same thing at all. Visibility can feel like proof that something matters. It is not the same thing as evidence that something is ready or that it was ever meant for an audience in the first place. A stonemason dressing a block of stone for a building's facade works for days on surfaces. Nobody will examine closely once a stone is finally set in place. Every angle gets checked, every rough edge smoothed, long before the piece is ever displayed. If the mason rushed that process just to show off progress to onlookers passing by, the finished work would carry visible flaws for as long as the structure stood. The unglamorous, unwatched labor is what makes the eventual display worth seeing at all. Proverbs 29 verse 11 says, "A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back." Restraint in that verse is not weakness, it is wisdom choosing not to spend everything the moment it is felt. Not every fire needs to be broadcast the instant it is lit. Some of the most significant things you carry will be strengthened, not diminished, by staying private a little longer than your impatience prefers. Jeremiah 17 verse 5 warns, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh." When approval starts to feel like fuel, something has quietly shifted from calling into performance. That shift rarely announces itself directly. It shows up as exhaustion, as a growing need for constant confirmation, as a nagging sense that presence alone no longer feels like enough. Presence and performance draw from entirely different reserves. Performance depends on an audience and depletes you the moment the audience looks away. Presence depends on nothing external at all, and it is the only one of the two that can sustain you through a season nobody else is watching. If you have been running on performance for a while, this is permission to step back into presence instead, even if it means far fewer people notice for a season. Notice, too, how differently these two postures feel from the inside. Performance carries a subtle, persistent hunger, a sense that no amount of recognition ever quite satisfies it. Presence carries something closer to rest, a quiet steadiness that does not depend on anyone else confirming it. If what you have been doing lately leaves you more depleted the more visible it makes you, that exhaustion is worth listening to rather than pushing through. There is nothing wrong with eventually being seen. Visibility itself is not the problem this section is naming. The problem is visibility arriving before the private work that should have preceded it, a stonemason's rough surface displayed before the smoothing was finished. Let the private work finish first. What eventually becomes visible will hold up far better for having waited. Ask yourself honestly what you are actually seeking underneath the desire to be noticed. Sometimes the answer is simple encouragement, a normal human need that deserves compassion rather than shame. Other times, underneath the surface, sits a deeper hunger for validation that no amount of visibility will ever satisfy, because the hunger was never about an audience. It was about a wound only presence with God has ever been able to reach. Naming that hunger honestly, rather than continuing to feed it with more visibility, is often the actual turning point. The exhaustion lifts not when the audience finally grows large enough, because it never does, but when the underlying need finally gets addressed at its actual source. 5. Feeling like a misfit is not a flaw. A specific kind of loneliness comes from outgrowing rooms you used to feel comfortable in, conversations that once entertained you now leaving you strangely unsettled, gatherings that once felt easy now feeling slightly too small for whatever is happening inside you. That discomfort is not a personality problem. It is often the natural friction of genuine growth. A luthier building a violin by hand works from a template, but no two instruments turn out identical, because the specific piece of wood, its grain, its density, its particular resonance, shapes the final instrument in ways no template alone could predict. An instrument built to a rigid, standardized mold, ignoring what the material required, would never produce its truest sound. Some instruments are not meant to match the standard shape exactly, because what makes them valuable is precisely what makes them distinct. Jeremiah 1 verse 5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you, before you were born I set you apart." Being set apart in that verse is not framed as punishment or exile. It is framed as intentional design, present before you had any say in the matter. The sense of not quite fitting that you have carried for a while may not be a flaw needing correction. It may be evidence of exactly the design that verse describes. Galatians 1 verse 10 asks a clarifying question. Am I now trying to win the approval of man or of God? That question is worth sitting with honestly. Some discomfort in a room is only discomfort, worth examining and possibly addressing. But some of it is the natural cost of no longer needing a room's approval the way you once did, and that particular discomfort is not something to fix. It is something to walk through. You do not owe anyone an explanation for growth they cannot yet see the shape of. Let some relationships take time to catch up, and let others not catch up at all. Neither outcome means something went wrong. It often just means the instrument was never built to match the standard template, and that was always part of the design. There will be moments when the temptation to shrink yourself back down to a more familiar, easier to explain shape feels strong, especially around people who preferred the earlier, simpler version of you. Resist that pull. An instrument reshaped to fit expectations it was never built for loses exactly the resonance that made it worth building in the first place. Let this be settled in you plainly. Not fitting is not the same as failing. Some of what has felt like a flaw for most of your life may only be evidence that you were built with a particular grain, a particular density, a particular resonance that a standard mold was never going to accommodate. That is not something to apologize for. It is something to finally stop resisting. There is real grief in this too, worth naming honestly rather than rushing past. Outgrowing spaces you once loved, even for good reasons, still costs something. You are allowed to miss the ease of belonging without complication, even while walking forward into whatever this particular shape of you was built for. Both things can be true. The old room fit once, and it no longer does, and both of those facts deserve acknowledgement rather than forced resolution. Of 6, distractions disguised as blessings. Not every opportunity that arrives while you are waiting for something else is actually meant for you, and learning to tell the difference matters more than most people realize. Some of what looks like a door opening is closer to a detour, dressed up convincingly enough to seem worth taking. Coffee roasting requires undivided attention during a narrow window near the end of the process, when beans shift rapidly from underdeveloped to perfectly roasted to burnt within a matter of seconds. A roaster distracted at exactly the wrong moment, pulled away by something that seemed urgent, can ruin an entire batch that took careful attention to bring that far. The distraction itself may not have been a bad thing in isolation. Its timing is what made it costly. Psalm 127 verse 1 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." A great deal of exhaustion comes not from doing bad things, but from doing things that were never assigned, expending real effort on a structure that was never meant to be built by your hands in the first place. Busyness is not the same thing as obedience, and a full calendar is not automatically evidence of a well-directed one. Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." This is not a suggestion to ignore reasoning altogether. It is an instruction to hold your own logic loosely enough that it does not override discernment when the two disagree. Here is a practical test worth applying to whatever is currently pulling at your attention. Does this carry genuine peace, the kind that remains steady even after the initial excitement fades, or does it only carry urgency, the kind that pressures you to decide before you have had time to actually think it through? Urgency alone is not evidence of alignment. Peace that survives scrutiny is a far more trustworthy signal, and it is worth pausing long enough to notice which one you are actually feeling. Watch, too, for how a distraction tends to arrive dressed as exactly the thing you have been hoping for. That is precisely what makes it effective. A detour disguised as an obstacle would be easy to refuse. A detour disguised as an answered prayer requires far more discernment to recognize, because it borrows the language and shape of the very thing you were actually waiting for. Give yourself permission to say no to something good in order to protect something essential. That is not ingratitude, it is stewardship. Not every open door was meant to be walked through, and closing one, deliberately and without guilt, is sometimes the clearest evidence that you have actually learned to tell the difference between what is urgent and what is genuinely yours to carry. This will require you to tolerate some discomfort, particularly the discomfort of disappointing people who expected you to say yes. That discomfort is not evidence that you made the wrong call. It is often just the ordinary cost of protecting something worth protecting, a cost that gets easier to pay the more practice you have paying it. Over time, saying a well-discerned no becomes less agonizing, not because the stakes shrink, but because you gather enough evidence, decision after decision, that peace really was a more trustworthy guide than urgency ever was. Trust that evidence. It has been right more often than the panic has. 7. The breakthrough has been forming undercover. Picture the moment a mining crew finally breaks through, after weeks or months of digging through what looked like nothing but rock, into a vein of ore that finally justifies every hour spent in the dark. Nobody above ground could see that progress happening. From the surface, the work looked identical day after day, the same rock, the same tunnel, the same apparent lack of visible result. And then, without warning to anyone watching from outside, everything the digging was actually for finally became visible. What you have been building has followed the same pattern. Psalm 118 verse 23 says, "The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes." Notice the surprise embedded in that verse, even though the outcome was never actually accidental. What emerges suddenly to an outside observer was never sudden to the process itself. It was the natural, inevitable result of sustained work finally reaching daylight. 1 Peter 5 verse 10 says, "And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." Notice that this restoration follows genuine difficulty, not instead of it. The suffering was not a detour from the promise. It was part of the path toward it, the same way the tunnel was not a detour from the ore vein, but the only route that actually led there. Mark 4 verse 22 says, "For there is nothing hidden except to be made known, and nothing concealed except to be brought out into the open." That verse was never a warning, it was a promise. What has been forming in you privately was never going to stay private forever, and its eventual visibility was built into the process from the very beginning, not tacked on as an afterthought once you finally grew impatient enough to demand it. You do not need to force this into daylight before it is ready. The vein does not need to be dug out ahead of schedule to prove it exists. What is true and what is forming will surface at exactly the pace it needs to, and when it does, it will not require your engineering to be recognized as real. Think about the crew still working underground in the days just before that breakthrough, when the rock ahead of them looked identical to the rock they had already cleared for weeks. They had no way of knowing from where they stood how close they actually were. Faithfulness in that stretch did not come from having proof the vein was near. It came from continuing to dig with the same care on the discouraging days as on the hopeful ones. You may be in exactly that stretch right now, closer than you realize to something that will look, in hindsight, like it arrived suddenly. It will not have arrived suddenly. It will have arrived exactly on time, at the end of a process that was real the entire way through, even on the days it looked like nothing but more rock. Let this settle the anxious pacing in you, if it has been present. You are not behind. You have not missed the vein by digging in the wrong direction. What is coming is arriving at the only pace that could have prepared you to actually recognize it, hold it, and carry it once it finally breaks through into daylight. Keep digging with the same care today that you brought to this work when it felt hopeless. That consistency, more than any single breakthrough moment, is what the whole process has actually been asking of you the entire time. What was once hidden has not stayed hidden by accident, and its emergence now is not an accident either. Something that was carefully kept is becoming visible at exactly the pace that was always intended, and no part of the waiting that brought you here was wasted. Isaiah 60 verse 1 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." That rising was never meant to draw attention to you for its own sake. It was always meant to illuminate something larger than any single moment of recognition could contain. John 11 verse 25 says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whatever in you has felt buried, dormant, or finished is not actually finished." What looked like an ending was preparation for exactly this kind of rising, arriving at precisely the point where you had stopped expecting it to. Walk forward today as someone who understands what the waiting actually built in you, not as someone rushing to prove that the waiting is finally over. The proof was never going to come from your announcement. It was always going to come from what has genuinely, quietly become true. Let this be the day you stop waiting for permission to trust what has already been formed in you, and start walking as the person that formation was always preparing you to become. The waiting is not what defined you. What it built in you is what defines you now, and that building was never wasted, whatever shape the next chapter ultimately takes. You do not owe anyone a performance to prove this season is real. Some of the most significant turns in a life become visible only in hindsight, once enough time has passed for the shape of what actually happened to come into focus. Let this one unfold the same way, on its own timeline, without needing an audience to confirm it. Before we go any further, let's bring this before God together, honestly, exactly as we are. Wherever you are right now, let your shoulders drop and your breathing slow, and let's step into this together, without rushing a single word of it, without needing it to sound impressive. Father, we come before you with reverence, recognizing that this moment was not an accident, but something you have been forming for longer than we realized. You have been speaking even in the silence, and now that the waiting feels different, we do not take that shift lightly. We lean in, fully present. We thank you for hiding what was still forming, for protecting what we were not yet ready to carry, and for the seasons of quiet that refined our hearing even when we mistook the silence for distance. We praise you for knowing what we did not, and for preparing us before we ever recognized we were being prepared. We confess the moments we grew impatient in the waiting, the times we assumed your quiet meant something had gone wrong, when in reality you were drawing us closer than we could feel. Forgive us for forcing doors that were being held shut in mercy. Forgive us for chasing approval when you were inviting us into something steadier. Lord, stir in us a deeper trust for what is still unfolding. Teach us not to rush what you are still forming, and not to trade what is holy for what is only visible. Give us the discernment to walk in healthy trust, not suspicion, and the wisdom to hold our boundaries without hardening our hearts toward the people around us. We surrender every dream, every whisper, every quiet conviction you have placed in us. We bring it back to you now. Refine it, shape it, and let our obedience carry weight even in seasons when nobody else is watching. Teach us to wait with trust and to walk forward without needing to explain ourselves to everyone. Thank you for trusting us with what has been forming. Give us clean hands and steady hearts as we carry it forward. Help us stay tethered to you rather than to the approval of anyone watching, and let what we carry serve something larger than our own recognition. We ask, too, for wisdom in our relationships, the ability to hold healthy discernment without hardening into suspicion, and the grace to release what has genuinely run its course without assuming the worst about everyone involved. Let our boundaries be steady and let our hearts stay soft. We also bring you the parts of this waiting that still feel unresolved. Not everything has settled into clarity yet, and some of what we carry is still genuinely uncertain. We do not ask you to erase that uncertainty before its time. We ask you to walk with us through it, the way you always have, even on the days we could not feel you there. Steady our hearts when the impatience rises again, as it likely will. Remind us that the waiting was never wasted, and that what has been forming in us has always been worth the time it took. We choose you over urgency, your timing over our timeline, and the quiet place over the need to be seen. And we say this not only with our words, but with the way we choose to walk forward from here. Awaken in us the steadiness to carry what has been forming without rushing it and without hiding from it either. Let us move forward in what is true, at the pace it actually requires. In Jesus' name, amen. If this reached something real in you today, share it with someone who has been quietly wondering whether their own waiting has meant anything. A like, a comment, a share, small things that carry this a little further towards somebody who needs to hear it. And as you go from here, receive this. What was hidden is ready to be seen, and you are ready to carry it.